Hey everyone, welcome to the Campfire. You know, there's a lot of wildfires going around now. We have a couple of them here in this part of the West, and I know they're all over on the other side of the Sierras and the Rockies and up into Idaho, and gosh, there's just wildfires everywhere. And that's kind of where this story tonight I want to tell you about. This came from Rusty Miller's book, Bigfoot Campfire Stories. Kind of applies to the fire on the river type thing. Let me tell you the story. My girlfriend Kelly and I were both working in Grand Junction, Colorado, you know, and we decided we'd do a river trip down the Colorado, which flows right through the middle of town. We both worked for the Colorado State Extension Service there. I worked in the horticulture department. She worked as a 4-H support person, helping the 4-H agents. Anyway, there's a boat ramp near the little town of Loma on the outskirts of Junction, and it's a popular place to put in and raft or canoe on down through the Ruby and Horse Thief Canyons, getting out just before the major rapids in Westwater Canyon, and that ramp is where we put in for our trip. It's typically a 2-day journey. Oh well, we decided to do it in 3. We'd spend a day hiking around and exploring the country. We had a small raft, plenty of food and beer and whatever you might need for a 3-day trip. So off we went. We were really looking forward to it. It's a quiet stretch of water, and with the only real rapids being at a place called Black Rocks, where the river cuts into some Precambrian basement rock that's several billion years old, and one can easily portage around if they want. Now most of the river is calm enough that even canoeists run it regular like. It doesn't take long until you're in Horse Thief Canyon, a beautiful, deep red rock canyon. It's paradise. I remember seeing a big hawk flying over the river with a live snake in its talons. Now, I've never seen anything like that before, or since. We floated on down the river and we found a nice beach to spend our first night on. The sky was clear, and it was just surreal. The stars were so thick. We were camped on a little estuary that had cut into the bank, making a small island with lots of willows. We had a quiet and a restful night, just happy to be outdoors. The next day, we decided to float on down a few miles, then find a camp spot, spend the rest of the day hiking. The canyon had opened up, and we knew there were several large canyons we could access on foot. One was called Me Canyon. I can't recall the others. Me Canyon had a giant alcove in it, and I just wanted to go see it. We hadn't seen many people on the river so far. It was late fall, and a lot of people were already back to work, having used up their vacation time. So we pulled over after a short time and beached our raft and made a lunch, and we took off again. We were on the outside of a long sweeping turn in the river, and the inside was a bit faster than the outside. Now, as we took off, we climbed a small bench just as a canoe came down the river. It was carrying a boy, probably around 12 years old, in the bow, and what we took to be his dad, an older man, in the back. They got into that faster water and immediately flipped their canoe. We watched. There was nothing we could do. They were hanging onto that canoe, and they managed to flip it back over and get back into it. Now, we were pretty happy they made it. Then they went on down the river. Now, we did notice a large party of 7 or so canoes come down behind them pretty short, and that made us feel a bit better. We knew that the inexperienced pair would have help if they needed it, and we thought no more about it. We went on our hike, having a great day, even though we didn't make it to Me Canyon. But when we got back to our camp, we discovered the man and his son had stopped just below us and set up their tent. Now, this wasn't something we wanted, as we were there for privacy and to get away from people. Their tent had only maybe 100 feet from where they had left the raft. It looked like they'd had to backtrack to get that close to us. They must have pulled their canoe back up the river or something. Well, it was almost dark, and we debated whether or not to float on down the river a bit. We decided it was just too late, so we set up camp just to hope they'd be quiet. We were both pretty disgusted, as camping etiquette says to not bunch up together, especially when there's just tons of places to camp. We had dinner, and it wasn't long till the coyotes started in. I love hearing them. They have such a wide range of vocals, and you can tell they just love to sing. In fact, the old-timers called them song dogs. It sounded like a large pack, but I know from experience just 2 or 3 of them can sound that way. I've watched them sing many times through binoculars. I've actually even had them come into my camp and yowl and yip in the middle of the night, right by my tent. But all of a sudden they stopped and went dead quiet. I was surprised because they seemed to be really having a great time. And they just stopped altogether just like that. It was strange. Now I perked up. Maybe there was a mountain lion in the area. That would be something we might want to be aware of. I talked to Kelly about it, and she agreed we should be a little cautious, not leave camp. We agreed to stick together. We sat there in the dark for a bit. We hadn't lit our lanterns or made a fire, as we were just stargazing. Kelly remarked that it was weird that even the frogs and the crickets were quiet. I hadn't noticed, but now that she pointed it out, it did seem weird. We both huddled together just a bit closer, which I certainly didn't mind. But all of a sudden, we could hear our neighbors, and it sounded like they was arguing. They'd actually been pretty quiet until then, and we'd kind of forgotten they were there. We could see smoke. They'd built a fire. We could hear the boy yelling, and he sounded scared more than angry. Then his dad was talking loud, but we couldn't make out what they was saying. Then all was quiet. The smoke disappeared, just like they'd put out the fire. Soon, the crickets and the frogs began making their night sounds. And the coyotes started howling again, though now a little farther off in the distance. Well, we went to bed and we had a peaceful night. We was really tired from our day hike, so I think things could have picked up and we wouldn't have heard a thing. I'm an amateur photographer, so I always get up really early when I'm out like that, so that I can shoot the sunrise. Photographers call sunrise and sunset the magic hours. Kelly, she was still sleeping, and I was up just sitting on a nearby rock in the early dawn, drinking a little coffee, when I heard our neighbors a-talking. I was really surprised to hear them up so early. I then realized the voices were getting fainter. They must already be on the river. This really surprised me. Nobody gets on the river when it's still nearly dark. Well, I went on ahead and I filmed a beautiful sunrise. Cirrus clouds. We were in for a weather change in the next day or two, I thought. The clouds, they were really nice, turning different shades of pink and orange as the sun rose, casting reflections in the river. I was in photographer's heaven. Soon, Kelly was up, and we made some pancakes over our little camp stove and had more coffee. This was the life. We were loving it. This would be our last day. We hated to go home and back to work, but we soon had camp packed up and we were on our way. It was still early, as we wanted to get an early start so we could maybe get in another hike. It wasn't that far out to Westwater. My sister would pick us up in my pickup. As we floated down the river, Kelly, who has a very sensitive nose, remarked that she could smell smoke. It took a while, but I could soon smell it too. It seemed to be coming from down the river, the direction that we were floating. It was too strong an acid to be a campfire. I wondered if the rancher at Westwater wasn't maybe burning his ditches. Well, as we floated down river farther, the smoke got thicker. We both got a bit more concerned. A river bottom fire would be hard to deal with, as there was really no place to go. Even though the canyons had opened up quite a bit, we still had cliffs on our right. The open bottom areas on our left and on the other side of the river were thick with willows and tamarisk and big cottonwood trees. So we decided to pull over and see if the smoke got worse rather than drifting right smack into trouble. I beached the raft on the right side of the river, thinking it would be safer, as the fire would surely come up the left side where all the vegetation was. And we sat there a while, waiting. Before long, a canoe had joined us, carrying a married couple. Well, we all sat and talked, wondering what was going on. Our talk soon stopped. The winds were picking up. What had been an early morning breeze now was turning into a good 10-15 mile an hour wind. A storm was definitely coming in. The smoke was getting thicker. We had no place to go, so we just sat there and we watched. Soon we could see flames coming up around the bend, just a good quarter-mile away. And sure enough, the fire was on the left side of the river, At least we were on the safer side to be on. The fire was being whipped by the winds, and we could now hear its roar. It was really something to behold, coming right at us. Then Kelly let out a yell and pointed. Running ahead of the fire, just barely out of its reach, were two large men, or large somethings, because they looked too big to be men. They were totally black from head to toe. It was hard to make out any features or any detail as they were enveloped by smoke. The fire was just nearly upon them, and at that point I could hardly breathe, and it felt like my hair was going to catch on fire. And Kelly yelled, "Get in the water." We all jumped in, nothing but our heads sticking out. Of course, at that point, no one could see the figures and what had become of them. I wondered if they hadn't also jumped in the river. The fire was soon past us, the winds whipping it rapidly along. I was able to breathe. Through the acrid smell of still smoking vegetation made my eyes water and my lungs ache, but we were still alive. There's no better way to bond with people than to go through something like that together. Kelly and I are still friends with the couple that had the canoe. We still speculate on who the black figures were and what became of them. I was glad the canoeists were there because, frankly, I was worried our raft had melted enough to be unsafe or even flat out sunk, but it seemed fine. The couple stayed with us the rest of the way out to make sure we were okay. So, we all floated on down the river together, wrapping wet t-shirts around our faces to cut down the smoke we inhaled on the way, as the vegetation was still smoking and there was little fires just everywhere. The wind made the going hard, and I had to row. We were soon at a big sandbar where we stopped. We didn't like what we saw there. We had to see if anyone needed help. It looked like an entire camp had burned. The whole place smoldered. We got out and we walked around, trying not to burn our souls, stepping on only the sandy places. And there on the bar, there was about a dozen tents, and each one was melted into the ground from the fire. Some were still melting, as nylon doesn't burn very well. It was an eerie sight. I know the others were thinking the same thing I was. What if we find a body, or more than one? As we walked around the campsite, it was obvious that whoever was there had left in a hurry. All kinds of things were scattered. I found a woman's makeup purse, and inside were lipstick and a hairbrush. Both of them melted into the purse itself. There were sandals melted into the ground, and even melted camp chairs. Only the metal little rods were left. After we had thoroughly walked around and made sure there was no one there, we were soon back on the river, quiet and subdued. It wasn't long until we reached the takeout and the ranger station at Westwater. We weren't prepared for what awaited us. There was a small group of people, maybe 20. 2 rangers with a state trooper arriving about the same time we did. One of the rangers came over to us as we were all pulling our boats from the water and asked us not to leave. She wanted statements from us. They were trying to figure out what had happened. Well, we assumed the fire was still burning its way up the river. Now, my sister was waiting in my pickup, so we loaded the boat and our gear, then sat on the tailgate and talked. After a while, the ranger took our names and phone numbers, saying they would call us in a day or two. They were overwhelmed, trying to make arrangements for the large canoeing party whose camp had burned. I noticed the man and his son standing a bit aside from the group. They looked very serious, and they didn't talk to each other. Well, we just went on home. Our idyllic little trip had turned into a bit of a nightmare. We were lucky to be alive. Kelly and I both had lung problems for several days, and they would periodically ache. Well, we finally recovered. It was a week later when we got a call from law enforcement ranger, asking if he could come and interview us. We didn't really have many answers, but we told him what we knew. They were especially interested in the story about the man and his son arguing. We asked for more information about the fire, but they couldn't say anything since it was still under investigation. But they did say the fire was out now. They soon got up to leave, as we really didn't have much to tell them, but that's when Kelly stopped him and told him that we'd forgotten something. She proceeded to tell him about the large dark figures running ahead of the fire. Now, the rangers told us that they'd heard that same story from the canoeist couple and had no idea what it could be. They were just as puzzled as we were. Now, several months later, Kelly got a call from Rich and Jeannie. That's the two canoeists that we'd met and we'd talked to. They wanted to have dinner with us and said they had some news about the fire. Rich worked for an environmental agency working to eradicate the invasive tamarisk from the river, and he knew everyone in the local boating world. Word had finally come out about the fire, as one of their members was friends with one of the rangers. Rich told us the following story. The man and his son, who had capsized their canoe, had seen a strange creature along the bank shortly before they capsized, and that's why they were on the inside of the current. They were trying to stay as far away from this thing as possible, and it seemed to be paralleling them on the river, and it was fast. It must have gone below where we were standing on the upper benches. We sure didn't see anything. The creature had gone on down the river, and they were scared, thinking it was looking for them. They had seen us, and they decided to backtrack and camp closer to us for safety. They hadn't wanted to alarm us, so they kept to themselves. But that very evening, about the same time we'd heard everything go quiet, there had been a small fire set next to their tent. The dad had discovered it and was able to immediately put it out. He thought his son had been trying to light a fire, which he'd ordered him not to do. He didn't want to draw any kind of attention to themselves. The son swore he hadn't done it. So that next morning they'd wakened to strange noises. So they got up and they left early. I found it strange that we had heard nothing, but maybe the creature just didn't know we were there. Anyway, the pair went on down the river, and this creature was soon once again paralleling them, but now there were two of them. By now, the man and the boy were scared to death. They were a bit ahead of the creatures, though, and they soon came upon the camp with the large canoe party. These were the people who had gone down the river right after them the previous day, but the dad and the son hadn't seen them, as they'd pulled into the willows to hide from the creature that was following them. Well, the pair decided to stop and seek safety in the numbers, although everyone was still asleep because it was just so early. Well, they beached their canoe and they went off into the camp. But now, all of a sudden, the grass around the camp was on fire. Fortunately, they were able to yell and get everyone up and into the canoes and down the river before it turned into a disaster. At this point, some of the party was suspecting the man and the boy might have set the fire. The timing just seemed a little too coincidental. They show up just as a fire starts. Well, everyone was soon at Westwater, and by now the rangers could see smoke rising from up the river. We showed up not too long after that. So things weren't looking too good for the man and his son. They decided to go ahead and tell everyone about the creatures tailing them. But it just sounded too fantastic for the rangers to believe, and no one else had seen anything. Well, they arrested the dad. The boy was taken into custody and then released to his mother. The dad, he was charged and released on bond. Law enforcement took over the investigation, and that's when we were interviewed. Come to find out, based on our testimony, the man was released and the charges dropped. They now had 4 people testifying that they had seen 2 strange creatures running from the fire. Now, I don't know what came of their investigation after that, but I doubt if it went any further. We were glad that whatever it was had left us alone, even though we didn't understand why. Well, so that's the story. I bet the man and his son never go down that river again. I doubt if I will. At least that stretch of river. And I bet this one went into that truth is stranger than fiction, Ranger Files. Makes you wonder, right? Were the Bigfoot, or was it just an illusion created from the smoke of the fire? Do you think the Bigfoot could have started the fires? And if so, how'd he do it? And why just the rafting trip? You would think if it was Bigfoot, they'd start fires whenever they wanted to. Or do they? And we just blame it on other reasons. And why would the Bigfoot target that man and the boy? There's so many unanswered questions. Well, folks, if you've had an encounter with one of these mysterious creatures, send a story in to us. We want to hear it. And so do the rest of the listeners. Well, until then, folks, it was good seeing y'all. And be careful with your fires. And now, you know, this time of year, it's probably best if you don't even have fires in most places. I know I don't burn much of anything outside of a pit. Never if there's any wind going on. Just got to be careful out there. You got a lot of people using the same resources, so take care of yourselves, take care of your neighbors. Until the next time I talk to you, this is Clay Steele. Good night.